My name is Dr. Haibo Chen from Institute for Transport Studies of University of Leeds. Just before we start, I would like to let you know that you can communicate with the speakers, with the organizers by using the chat section on the control panel. So if you have the questions and put it there, we will see your questions. And as you always know that discussions is a very useful way to get the feedback from you and also clarify your worries in the first place. So do use the chat facility to communicate with us, also to ask questions, no matter what they are. We all like it. Okay, so let's make a start. As I said that University of Leeds is the work package 5 leader responsible for updating the FOT methodology, organizing webinars and workshops, and also take the feedback into the FAST handbook in the next round. So your feedback and your input will be very important. So thank you very much again for your participation. So far we have organized 2 webinars over the last 2 weeks. And today, Helena Gellerman at SAFER, we are talking about ethical and legal issues, which is extremely important and difficult to issue in FOT methodology. So let's wait for her presentation. Just to give you a couple of sentences about Helena. Helena has been a project manager for various national and European FOT activities at SAFER. And she has been involved in SEMI-FOT, Euro-FOT, FOT-NET, FORNET2, Driver C2X, and so on. So in this project, especially the FORNET2 support action, she was the working group leader on data sharing and legal issues, participating, supported the legal issues working group as well. So it's our pleasure to have her today as a speaker talking about this important issue. Then I would like to, as you can see on the screen, FORNET data is a continuation of FORNET support actions. So I just give you a quick run through of the essential information about the project. The project has 3 targets, objectives to achieve, mainly driven by sharing and the use of FOT datasets collected in the previous activities. So the question is how easy the data can be shared and reused, and what we need if we can learn a lesson from this project can we do in the first place, so that we can make the future data more friendly to share. So this support action is a continuous international platform for much wider FOT activities, sharing experience, and also promote the cross-border activities. As you can see in the table, and the project is structured into these 6 work packages just to reflect what the objectives are in this project. And you can see the partners on the right side, and we have a number of associated partners. We are still including the new associated partners if they find that the project really can bring the benefit to them. The work package 5 is specifically tackling FOT methodologies. We wanted to have this work package for people who are not that familiar with methodologies, or they needed to know methodology in order to deliver their FOT activities. So this one is designed for people who wanted to know more about FOT methodology and learn how to use it. The work package is structured into the 3 tasks as well, and this webinar is part of target 5.2. Overview of the webinars. We already done 2, and today we cover 3. In the new year, we will be delivering another 3 webinars. As you can see on the screen, we would like to look at the data collection and tools needed to analyze the data, to make the data to be shared and reused. We will look at the impact assessment as well, cost-benefit analysis, which is really the outcome of the FOT methodology, the activities. So it's an important part of FOT methodology. The last one, we'll look at the data sharing and data reuse. So there's a new knowledge to be fed into this webinar from this project. All the materials and presentations will be converted to e-learning modules. This can be used for the later purpose and so on. Just a quick mention this workshop we are going to organize next month. It's focused on the FOT data reuse, and so we will have a number of projects to be presented in this at this workshop. We will have different data sets to test. So it's a good opportunity to see how the existing data sets were collected, and more importantly, whether or not they can be easily shared. So you can find agenda, and you can read yourself at this address already put. So this one is not for advanced users. This one can be useful for all the users. So finally, you can find the information and cooperation opportunities at project website. And if you have specific questions, you can forward to us using this email address. Okay, so now let's move to the topic. So we will pass the screen on to Helena. The floor is yours, Helena.
Thank you. Just put away that. Welcome here to the webinar here on legal and ethical issues. I thank you first, Taibo, for the kind presentation. Maybe when you think about legal and ethical issues, maybe it's not the most fun topic that you want to deal with when you set up an FOT or an NDS. But my advice is that you actually really go into the details of this in the beginning of the project, because if you wait down the line in the project, it will consume a lot more time and also resources to solve the issues. So after this presentation, I really recommend you to go to the FESTA handbook and go through this when you start up the project. I can really understand that the main focus when you start a project is on the hypotheses, and you want to collect data and also analyze it and get some results. But please look into these details as well. Okay, so what I will talk about today is the legal and ethical issues. It is a quite large part of the FESTA V. The FESTA V is a picture that is meant to describe the different parts that you need to do when you set up an FOT. You see it here on my screen. And it shows you the different steps on the left-hand side, it's how to prepare the actual data collection. And on the right-hand side, you see when you have the data, how do you treat it, analyze it, and then get some results through impact assessment and socioeconomic and cost-benefit analysis. As you can see here, the ethical and legal issues is a large part mainly concentrated in connection with data collection and the analysis. It goes into all the way from when you start doing your study design and all the way through treating the data and the data analysis. I would like to say, though, that the legal and ethical issues, they affect everything in the project. And it's important that you start with this actually at the same moment as you start doing your project proposal, because it has effects on also how you share the data afterwards and what you write in the description of the proposal for the project. So please look into these details when you actually sit there and do the proposal. I would also like to comment on that when you work with the legal and ethical issues and go through the left-hand side of the FESTA-V, you set up your hypotheses and you look at what kind of data do you need. And then you, after you kind of decided that, some projects go afterwards and look at the legal and ethical and how that affects the hypotheses and the kind of data that you want to collect. And therefore you will have quite a few iterations before you can start collecting the data. For instance, you might have a hypothesis where you see that it would be really good if you could get audio to see if there's other people present in the car, if the driver is talking to someone and what they say. But at the same time, there are quite strict personal integrity issues connected with that. And that might do so that you actually have to rethink your hypotheses. That was just one example. But anyway, so if we continue and we look into the FESTA handbook, there are several topics that are related to legal and ethical issues. And in this presentation, I will focus on the participant recruitment, the participant agreement, ethical approval, system safety, approval for on-road use, and insurance and responsibility, which are those last three are more towards the vehicle, and then the collection of video data in restricted areas. And last but not least, it's actually the largest discussion point where in the projects that I've been participating in is the data protection and the data ownership and how that affects the setup of the whole project actually. So we'll finish off with that one. So we start with an introduction because I want to point out the importance of the participants. It's obvious. I mean, the participant and the vehicle is an important part in an FOT, of course. But the participant is the core of the FOT and NDS. You do an FOT and NDS because you want to see how the driver interacts with the environment and how the person conducts its normal driving. That's why you do an FOT and NDS. And if you do an FOT, you want to see how the driver interacts with the systems. And the driver the participant usually joins the project not for the economical compensation that they get. Mostly it's actually to help out in the project. It could also be that they want to try a new car, or they want to try a system and so on. But mostly it's to help the society. And the participant also invites us to follow his or her everyday life. Because usually you follow the person, or you what they do during maybe two months up to 12 months. And a lot of the FOTs include video, so you can actually see what the person do in the car for every time they drive for a year. So that's why I want to point out at the start to value your participants and treat their data and privacy with respect. That's so important. If we don't do that, we might come into a situation where people do not want to participate in new FOTs. I also want to point out the importance that the participant need to be informed and to give their consent to participate. The last I want to bring up here in the introduction about the participant is the non-participants, the rights of the non-participants. Because if you will always, in most FOTs NDS, you will have passengers in the cars or in the vehicles that are included in the FOT. And usually you don't get a consent from them in written, on paper. And you have to think a lot about how you treat that data, and also the data that you collected while setting up the project, because there are people that signs up to become a participant, but maybe you select someone else. And how do you treat the information that you got from the person that didn't end up in the FOT? Another major part when it comes to the legal and ethical issues are the legal context. Here in this presentation I bring up the European law and regulations. There is a similar setup if you look at the US context, as you have the federal laws and you have the state laws. And I know it's the same in China, that there are different levels of laws and regulations. But I bring up the European as an example. There is an directive and laws on the European level, especially around how you treat data regarding the personal integrity. These laws, as it is right now, it's a directive, and they are interpreted differently in each of the countries in Europe. So there are different laws that you have to adhere to depending on the country that you are setting up your FOT in. Therefore, it becomes very important to know if you have cross-border traffic in your FOT. Because if your vehicle goes into another country, you have another set of laws and regulations that you have to take into account. And therefore it's important to have a good cooperation with all the organizations that comes from different countries that are a part of your FOT, but you also have to have knowledge about other countries that the car might travel in. I also want to bring up in the legal context the health and safety aspects, because as we actually have vehicles in traffic, accidents might occur, And it's really important that you do a really good risk management when setting up the FOT to identify the different things that could happen. And here you can also go to the FESTA handbook, which brings up quite a few of the aspects, and I will address some of them in this presentation. During the project FOTNet 2, we did an in-depth investigation about the legal information concerning a lot of aspects on FOTs and NDS. And we collected data from Germany, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, and France on these legal issues. And they are included as an annex in the FESTA handbook. And so if you are conducting FOTs in any of these countries, you can get good information here. I just want to raise an issue, though, that the laws are changing all the time. So it's very important that you involve legal expertise when you set up an FOT. It should be on the level of all the EU countries that you participate, if we talk in the European context, but all the countries that you worldwide are performing your FOT in. And it's also important that you have a predefined setup of the data logging and the different systems that you want to use, because that affects also the legal reasoning around this. So this is my introduction. So let's go into more in detail what's in the FESTA handbook. We start with the participant recruitment. It's important that you, I would say, in each of the topics that I addressed, there are many more things that need to be done. So in this presentation, I only bring up the things that have an legal and ethical connection. So when it comes to the participant recruitment, it's important that you check that the participants are entitled to drive the FOT vehicles. And one thing here is that you have to look at the insurance coverage. In general, we recommend, if it's your own vehicles that is a part of that makes the foundation for the FOT, that you have an insurance that covers the whole fleet. But in quite a few FOTs, you use the participant's own vehicle or a fleet vehicle. And it's important that you check the insurance coverage of the participant or the fleet owner to see that the different aspects are covered, or that the insurance covers the different aspects that could happen in your FOT. Also, when it comes to insurance coverage, it's important to also, if the vehicles will travel across borders, that the insurance is covering that as well. The last thing I want to bring up when it comes to participant recruitment is the medical conditions that could affect the participation. The thing is that in quite a few countries you can ask the participants about certain things that might affect the result or maybe the hypothesis questions that you bring up, because they might have things that might affect the result. But in some countries it's not legal to actually check things on the participant before you start. So one thing that you could do to at least have it in your consent form and make the participant aware of it is to bring it in the consent form, because that the participant agreement is something that the participant signs, and then they are aware of if you have certain things that you would like to know. The participant agreement, it's the it's legally a signed contract between the participant agreement and the handling organization. And it's important to know that from the participant view, it's actually the organization that signs this contract that is on behalf of the project is responsible towards the participant for how the data is treated. That is important to know. And in the consent form, or participant agreement, as it's also called, there are certain topics that should be addressed. The obligations that on both sides, both for the participant and the handling organization, should be addressed. Any liability issues if something happens, and also insurance, like the one I addressed in the previous slide. If there is a lack of insurance somewhere, that you have to address that. And you also have to be aware that if you're logging personal data, that requires also an informed consent. So you should have the participant to actually sign this contract. You should also include information about who are the parties that will use the data, and will you have data sharing after the project. In some countries, it's important that the participant actually explicitly say that it's okay to reuse the data afterwards. It depends on the ethical approval procedure that is present in the country where you do your FOT. You should also address the whole scope of processing over the lifetime of the data. The thing is that this is what the participant agrees to, and if you do other kind of processing, you actually need to go back to the participant to get consent to doing that new processing. Also, you could address that the participant commits to, or there is a traffic offense or incurs in a traffic penalty, and how do you deal with that? That is something that you can put in the participant agreement. And also, who is responsible if there is a minor damage of the vehicle. I mean, if it's their own vehicle and it's normal driving, it's usually covered by the participant. But if it deals with equipment that you put in the car, you have to deal with those, and it's good to have that in the participant agreement, so you're dealing with it before anything happens. And you should also say who are entitled to drive the car. Like other household members. Maybe it's even so that you can actually have household members as participant, but beware of that they really have to sign a participant agreement then as well then, if you're going to use that data in the project. On the next slide, we address the ethical approval. And the ethical approval is something that is mostly used when it comes to medical research and personal integrity when you deal with sensitive data. In some respect, you have that in FOTs as well. Like, for instance, if you collect medical information about the participant and so on. There are different national requirements for an ethical approval in Europe and in other countries as well. So you have to check the national requirements where you will perform your FOT. And if an ethical approval is needed, it's important that you include it in your project time plan because it could be time consuming. Both to put in the to put together the actual application, which could be pretty large. But it could also be a time, maybe the ethical approval committee can't respond to your request right away. There could be a time delay of maybe 2-3 months before you get your answer. So be sure to include that in your timetable. And usually in most countries there is a strict ethical approval and human subject review procedure that you should follow. So you have to check that specifics for your in your specific country. And I also want to point out that the individual's protection and rights always supersede any interest of the scientific progress. This is important. We really have to, like the first slide that I started with, take care of the participants. So that was the slides in the beginning, the participant recruitment, the participant agreement, and ethical approval. That is very much focused on the participant. Then we have legal aspects when it comes to the vehicle and the systems that you put in the vehicle. And first we address, the FESTA handbook addresses the system safety, and it's important to be aware of that if you put a system in the car, you could introduce hazards into the car. And you can look upon it in two ways. The project could include project-developed vehicle functions, where you actually have developed hardware and software, and you want to test this function in an FOT. So if you include this, depending on how far-reaching this function is, the amount of risk that you introduce in the car is different. So you really have to be aware of this. And another line, another thing that you always will put in an FOT is the data acquisition system. It should not affect the actual functions in the car, but it could still, through different ways, affect it. And the hazards that the FESTA handbook have focused on are radio and electrical interference, and that is not so uncommon when you introduce a new system. So it's really important that you are aware of, if you put in new systems in the car, that you do EMC tests and you see that it doesn't affect the actual base functioning of the car. The system could also reduce vehicle crashworthiness, especially if you put things in the compartment in the vehicle. If you have things that could loosen during a crash or so, you have to pay really good attention to this. And also, if you introduce HMI designs, it could cause distraction, which the participant is not used to, and then it might add to the risk that there will be an incident or a crash. So be aware of these hazards that could be introduced, either if you introduce a project-developed system or the actual logger system. There is another case, of course, that if you work with a vehicle manufacturer or so, that you actually do modifications of the basic systems that are already in the car. But then you should go through a formal system safety assessment. Okay, that was for the system safety, and that affects what I will bring up now on the approval for on-road use. Every car that is run need to get a whole vehicle type approval. If you buy a car, it's already done by the vehicle manufacturer. The type approval is done on the specifications, the normal specifications of the car, and if you alter that in some way to some extent, you might need to do a new type approval, but that is kind of far-reaching if it's really large changes, which might mostly come into place where if you introduce a totally new system that goes into and affects the car. But still, you have to be aware of the type approval and construction and use regulations. And here it's the same, that you have to check with the appropriate national authority where the car will be. But usually, if you get a type approval in one country, if I look at Europe now, if you get a type approval in one country, it's okay. It's normally okay to use it all over Europe. The last that kind of affects more the vehicle and what could happen during the actual trial is the insurance and responsibility. And it's really important that you discuss this at the beginning of the project. Like I mentioned earlier, is that the indemnity insurance should cover the whole FOT. That's the best way, because then you are, or you should have that kind of insurance. And it's important that you confirm that the large risks that could happen, that they are covered. Like, for instance, if you have a crash. Usually, in most FOTs, you employ the organization's own professional indemnity insurance. But it is really important that you think about this when you set up an FOT, because if a crash occurs, it could be that there could be a large amount of money involved. So please seek legal advice in this risk-sensitive aspect. I also already covered the vehicle insurance in the participant recruitment, and where I mainly focused on if you use the participant vehicle, and that you should really see that insurance covers the actual test setup. I also want to bring up that you look into the responsibilities and that you put it on paper. Who is responsible for what? Especially when it comes to looking at the vehicle. If you say that you introduce either a logger system or you introduce a project-developed system, that you look into what are the responsibility for the organization that realized the function, that actually did the logger or did the system, developed the new system that should be tested. And you should also look at the responsibilities for the organization that actually integrate this into the vehicle. So you have 3 different parties in general. One that developed the system, one that integrates it into the vehicle, and you have the vehicle manufacturer as such, especially if they are a part of the project. So be sure to clarify the responsibilities here and put it on paper. Then you know if something happens, that you already know how you would treat any problems that would turn up. It's a lot of things that you have to think about. Setting up an FOT, and it's not obvious if you come, if you just want to perform your research. So all these aspects that I bring up might be a bit overwhelming, but it is important that you think about them beforehand. So that will ease any problems or discussions that you will have later on. I want to bring up a certain kind of video data collection or video data collection in restricted areas, because usually you can do video collection depending on the national laws, but there are certain restricted areas that you should be aware of, and I just want to bring up them because it could be illegal or prohibited to use external videos in these places. One thing is at the places where you cross borders, there could be certain prohibitions that you can't use your cameras. There could be military locations, and also which probably mostly relates to when you have trucks and deliver goods. That when you go into an area to pick up or deliver goods, that they don't want you to use a camera there. So you have to deal with that in the project in some way. So you have to think of maybe you need to turn off the driver should be able to turn off the external video and in these on these occasions. So the last thing that I want to bring up is I was actually one of the largest areas, and which in the projects that I've been present in have been one of the largest discussion points. Who owns the data? Who can use the data? Should we reuse the data after the project? And how do you protect the data? Here I bring up the EU directive that was done in 1995 on personal integrity. But as I have experience working with data from the US and also collecting data in China, I know that there are similar laws in many different countries, of course. The thing in Europe is that, like I mentioned before, there are different national implementations. So you have to be aware of how you have to protect your data. And according to that law, because in these three last slides we're dealing with that you have collected data and how do you treat it. If you are working in a project where you are going to transfer the collected data across different countries, if we look at Europe and based on the EU directive, you can transfer data that has been collected between European countries. But if you need to transfer data, if you, for instance, have a European organization involved in the project that is going to participate in the analysis, you need to have an explicit participant consent. So that is important that you think about that when you write your participant agreement. So it's just the EU directive only covers transfer within EU. I also wanted to mention that there is a new law under discussion. It has been the European Parliament have said okay to it. So right now it's under discussions how to deal with it further on. But there is a huge discussion about this new law because it deals a lot with the personal integrity. So we'll see, and I just want to mention it to bring it to your attention. Depending on when you start your new FOT, it's important that you are aware of that there might be new laws on the way. When it comes to the data protection and data ownership here, I also want to bring up, as I've done earlier, a lot of focus here is on the participant, and it's important that you get the informed voluntary consent. Because in the participant agreement, you describe the scope of how you should process the data during the whole project. And if you misses out something, if you want to do maybe other research, or you want to treat the data, send it to someone else, you actually have to go back to the participant and get a new consent. So it's really important that you think about how should you use the data during the project and also for reusing the data. So you get that into the participant agreement from the beginning. I want to bring up the data that is really concerned when it comes to the legal and ethical issues in an FOT NDS. It's video recording, it's audio recording, and it's also GPS. Those are the most important data sets that you have to think about how you will use them. When it comes to the internal video recordings, if you set up a camera inside the car, it's important that you put up signs in the vehicle and that you, as far as possible, get consent. Usually you have consent, you collect consent from the driver, which is the participant. But of course, during this period, if it's not a very, very specific FOT, but most FOTs in NDS are, the focus there is that the participant should use the cars as they normally do, and therefore they will have passengers in the car. So then you have to think about to put up signs in the vehicle so the passengers are aware of that they are being on the camera, on the video. And if you have cameras that are pointing at the passengers specifically, you might consider to have lower resolution. And here, as in many different other places in this presentation, I advise you to get legal expert advice on this matter. I also want to bring special attention to the minors as passengers, because the driver can say to an adult that okay, I have cameras in my car, and the passenger coming into the car can say, okay, that's fine, there's no problem. But if you have minors, it's not okay if the child says okay. You actually have to go back to the parents to the child, and therefore it's more you have to have a consent from the parents, and I just want to bring that up so that you are aware of it. This is dealing with internal video recordings, but you will also, because you want to know how the driver interacts with the environment, you might want to bring up cameras towards the surroundings. And here you have the data privacy, the recognizability of other road users and registration numbers from the cameras. And one way to get around this is to have low camera resolution, so you actually can't identify them. But the thing is that you have to check in your own country what is the national solution for this for different contexts. So you have to check your own rules, how you have to deal with this. But as you don't have consent from other road users or the car in front of you when it comes to registration numbers. It's important that you think about this when you set up the FOT. Another thing with video, I just want to bring it up. It's important that you are aware of the video on the internet that can give you substantial problems if videos that you have collected afterwards turns up on the internet. So you have to be really sure how you protect the video if you collect that. I also want to mention audio. In the FOTs NDS that I've been a part of, we have not collected audio. But here you also have to put up signs, and you have to get consent the same way as with video. And you can have low resolution of the recordings and so on. But audio is even more personal, because then you can hear what the people talk about if you don't have low enough resolution, and that goes further into the personal integrity. Finally, I just want to point out that if you take a part of if you have video or GPS or audio, you can have, if you extract a certain data set, you can have anonymized data. But if the data set is in some way being able to be connected to video, it's not anonymized anymore, because then you can see the person and identify the person. So that is an aspect that you have to think through. So the last slide that I have is on how can you deal with this within your project. And so one thing is that all the personnel that deals with the data needs to get appropriate education on personal integrity issues. There are educations online on the web that gives a broad overview of personal integrity issues. So the recommendation is to have this education on personal integrity issues, but also have an education how are they set up in the environment where you will treat the data and analyze the data, and how are which precautions have been taken to protect the data, so that all personnel are aware of that. The personal ID should be encrypted and kept separate from the main database, and you should see to, if you have personal data, that you have secure locations for data analysis, and that data transfers are encrypted, that the data is encrypted when you transfer it. You also have to write agreements on data ownership, use and reuse. It usually starts already in the DOV, in the project proposal, in the funding, in the agreement with the funder of the project, but also in the consortium agreement. So these things about data ownership and use, you have to be aware of that really early in the project. And to deal with conflicting stakeholder interests. For instance, if you are testing systems, the OEMs might not want that you compare the system, whereas other stakeholders like authorities, maybe they fund the project because they want to know how does these systems, how effective are they. So that is something that is good to discuss really early in the project. Finally, there is, in most FOTs and NDS, you want to collect the CAN bus data, the data that is running on the internal data communication line in the car. And here you have to involve the vehicle manufacturer to filter out project data. So this concludes my presentation, and I just want to mention that the FESTA Annex deals, which is the FOTNet 2 data sharing report, brings up a lot of more details into these issues. So I can really recommend that part. So hereby I want to thank you for your attention, and if you have questions, you can always contact me afterwards. But we're happy to answer any questions now.
Okay, Helena, thank you very much for the presentation, which is well thought and structured. Thank you very much. That's very, very interesting. Just to check whether there's any questions from the audience. So can I just ask a quick question here? Hopefully it's a quick.
Okay.
You mentioned system safety. You put quite a lot of hazards there. Does the handbook include do's and don'ts, like what is the best practices to address system safety, or do we need a kind of best practice to improve the system safety?
Yes, I would say that there is not so much written in the FESTA handbook on the system safety. I think, I mean, it brings up the issue that you have to think about the type approval so you don't violate it, and the different hazards if you introduce a new systems, because for instance, the EMC tests and so on, that should be done if you introduce a new system. It's not done in great detail. So that might be a thing that we have to consider if we update the FESTA handbook.
Thank you so much. Given the time, we have no time left, so I would like to close this webinar. Thank you very much, Helena, for your presentation. And also, I would like to thank everybody who participated in this webinar. And hopefully, we have an opportunity next week and next month to see you in Barcelona if you can make if you can attend our first workshop. Otherwise, bye-bye to everyone, and see you or talk to you in the new year. And perhaps it's too early to say Merry Christmas. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.